Hey guys. How's the volume? Adequate?
Perfect.
Up? Good. No, up. See, because that could mean turn it up, or it could mean it's good. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. We need to hone our semantic. All right. Thank you for coming to hear Dana Spiotta tonight. First of all, I want to thank our donors, the Zalazniks, after whom the series is now named, for making this series possible. Thanks to Karen and Marianne for setting all this up. And I wanted you to know that though I am officially on leave, I removed myself from leave to interview Dana for the podcast today. So I'll be posting that at Writers at Cornell tomorrow. If you like what you hear tonight, and you will, we had a good talk this afternoon, and you can hear that on the internet. So yes, not much would bring me out of my sabbatical cave, but an afternoon with Dana is definitely on that very short list. She teaches writing at Syracuse University, which is not far from here, and I know her from her readings and talks at the Colgate Writers Conference, but she's here because of her 3 excellent novels, Lightning Field, Eat the Document, and Stone Arabia. At times, Dana reminds me of some of my other favorite writers. She's as deft, I think, as Ann Beattie at rendering the serendipitous, moody quality of American middle-class life, particularly the way people talk to each other. She is, like Lydia Davis, excellent at subtle convolutions of thought, at evoking the kind of cognitive disturbances characteristic of our era, and she is, I believe, Don DeLillo's equal at incorporating elements of contemporary political and popular culture into fiction. But Dana is more than the sum of her peers. The preoccupations of her fiction, I think, are unique. There is no contemporary match for her ongoing exploration of media and internet culture, and the effect of these upon the individual psyche, self-conception, and memory. This investigation began in Lightning Field, where one man's preoccupation with the then rather new internet casts a strange shadow upon his marriage, and where a woman's preoccupation with missing, abused, and murdered children, or more specifically the media's coverage of them, alters her regard for her own children. In Eat the Document, Dana uses her character's obsession with records, particularly the Beach Boys and Bob Dylan's, as a channel for the creation and recreation of personal identity, and gives us a stunning portrait of the way the idealism of one era can turn into self-indulgence and cynicism in another. In this book, rock and roll and other forms of pop culture are more than just window dressing or period detail. They're vital elements of cultural self-conception. In Stone Arabia, her latest book, and I would argue her best, we get a chilling portrait of the internet's effect on present-day cognition. Protagonist Denise's struggle to understand herself, and a reclusive musician brother Nick is colored by her immersion in the self-generated hall of mirrors that is the internet. We think of the internet as the world, as something outside ourselves. Dana renders it correctly and importantly as a reflection of ourselves, something we make in our own image, but which we dangerously regard as an objective truth. The novel also explores the nature of artistic self-creation. Nick's voluntary obscureness and carefully curated eccentricity break open the previously inviolable boundaries of DIY and indie music culture. We talked about this today. It's hard to write convincingly about this stuff, and Dana's very good at it. It's a subtle and exciting look into some previously unexamined American intellectual and creative currents. In short, Dana's writing about the present day, this immediate American moment, in a way that will stand the test of time. Her books, in my opinion, will never feel like period pieces. Rather, they'll stand as examples of those rare works of literature that see their own place in time with real clarity. Dana's work is also very formally inventive. I'm going to skip that section, though, because I think you should hear her instead of me now. And her characters are beautifully drawn. They're deeply flawed, but very, very sympathetic. And their sentences are spare and elegant. Their rhythm is peculiar, offbeat, yet compulsively readable. And she's a meticulous writer. There's an ounce of excess in this work. She's not only created in little more than a decade 3 very strong books with immense emotional power, but a conceptual and aesthetic framework on which it's possible to anticipate her building a diverse, intense, and lasting body of work. So, pressure's on, dude. Anyway, what you're about to discover about Dana is that she is, in addition to everything else, a spectacular reader and raconteur, and it would be cruel to keep you from her for another second, and definitely stick around afterward for some Q&A with Dana if you have any questions from the reading. So without further ado, here's Dana.
Thank you, John. And thank you all for coming out on this very snowy day to hear me read. And I don't think I'm going to be able to live up to what John says, but I will read from Stone Arabia. Stone Arabia is about a brother and sister, and it takes place in Los Angeles in 2004. Most of it does. There's some earlier parts about their childhood. And they have a very, they grew up on sort of the fringe of the city, not very well-to-do, and they kind of raised themselves. Their parents were sort of not present, and became very close. And this story takes place when sort of everything falls apart. The accommodations they've made to each other have really no longer are working. So they're middle-aged now. They're in their late 40s. And so that's what the book's about, this kind of crisis year in their relationship. And it's really told through the sister. So the section I'm going to read first is between Nick, the brother, and Denise, the sister. And the only other thing you need to know is that their daughter, Ada, her daughter, excuse me. It's not that kind of book. She has a daughter, Ada, who's now 25. And he does not have a daughter. Okay, I think I've said enough. I'm an ABAWD, an Abawad, Nick said. What's that? Able-bodied adult without dependence. They don't like to give Abawads any help. They fingerprinted me and issued me an electronic benefit transfer card. Nick had finally signed up for food stamps. He got $108 a month, which wouldn't come close to making up for the shifts he could no longer work. He handed me the shiny food stamp credit card. It had a picture of pristine Pacific coastline on it. He took it back, slipped it in his wallet. At least you got something. Yes, indeed. I remember the moment when I first understood Nick and I had made real mistakes. Nick was in his early 30s or had just turned 30. These were the years when my life was organized by Ada, my blundering and earnest care of Ada. I remember noticing with real sadness that we had strayed from an acceptable course, that our lives were going in the wrong direction. I actually thought those words, how far we have strayed, but I don't know if that was accurate. That would imply that we were on the right course at some point. We were having a pool party. The Maltman Avenue apartment complex where I was living at the time had a bright blue kidney-shaped swimming pool. In every respect, my Maltman apartment was horrible. The walls were thin drywall, the doors were hollow. At night, I could hear arguing and fucking from all directions. This is what people don't realize unless they have lived it. The low-level indignities of a lousy, cheap apartment cloud your every moment. When I stood in the kitchen, I couldn't fully open the refrigerator door without hitting the edge of the stove. The plastic shower surround had permanent hard water stains and moved when I leaned on it. Then there was the neutral-colored carpet and its odd petroleum smell, the sliding natural wood laminate shutter-styled closet doors that came off their rails each time I tried to open them, the popcorn ceiling I got to stare up at each night, and the odd layout contrived not for utility but only to fit the most in the least. It wasn't at all the same as living in an older, rundown apartment. This apartment was old new, and being brand new was the only thing it had ever going for it. When Ada and I moved into our one bedroom, it felt, the low ceilings, the dark hallways, the flimsy construction, old and used, maybe only 5 years old, but old already. I accepted it because I believed it was temporary. Everyone did. No one wanted to imagine an entire life lived in that kind of space. But the Maltman Avenue apartment complex did have one significant redeeming feature: the community pool in the central courtyard. It was perfectly fine, clean and full of chlorine, and no one really used it. Ada and I would have the pool to ourselves on hot afternoons, of which there were many. I taught her to swim, and it made up for a lie. We were having a pool party. I was dating this guy Bill at the time. He was a lot older than I was. He made good money as a lighting technician. He was a member of IAT SE Local 33. He was not my usual type, but he asked me out and we ended up together for almost 2 years. He liked how I looked. I think that was it, mostly. And he seemed charmed by our many differences, at least at first. I thought I was being practical, but he liked to tell me what to do, and when he drank too much, he would say things like, "You sure got it all figured out, don't you?" His low-grade sarcasm didn't hurt me, it just made me feel dull and tired. Bill did help Ada and me. He helped me with rent sometimes, he helped me with my car. I needed help. This particular party had gone on too long. Everyone had been drinking all day in the sun. Ada, she was 8 maybe, lay by the pool eating potato chips and reading. I was high but not out of control. The day carried itself and kept going. I had finally persuaded Bill to cook the hamburgers and hot dogs on the grill. The 10 or so people had eaten. The day was starting to fade into night, and people hung in there, talking, listening to music, drinking, disappearing, and returning the way people do at a party. Ada, I remember, also had a little girlfriend there. Earlier, they splashed in the pool, and now they lounge face down on fluorescent pink beach towels, reading magazines and talking to each other. Foggily, or through a fog of party murmur, I heard a rise in the pitch of Bill's voice. I looked up at the stairs leading to our apartment, and there stood Bill and Nick. The volume of their argument escalated. They were nearly shouting. We all turned to look at them as the noise continued and rose above the music and conversation. We all stopped talking and watched them. A drunken, stupid argument. It was still daytime. The sun had not yet sunk out of view. I watched, Ada watched, we all watched as the men started pointing and shouting and stood back from each other. There was this evaporative moment, the moment when you could feel the violence in the air. Everyone was there with them on the cusp. To watch it as it was happening made time seem to slow and also to collapse as I felt something rise in my chest and wave through my body. The intense autonomic discharge of frantic energy. It made me intake my breath sharply as though I were about to be hit. Go ahead, Nick said. He held open his hands, palms out. He had a queasy smile. He had the liberated, reckless glee of someone who knows what's coming. Go ahead, you motherfucker. Bill slammed his fist into Nick's face. A loud smack of skin with a cracking sound underneath, a sharp outbreath, a yelp of pain. The fight was over. Bill stormed down the stairs. I shrieked at him. He left. Nick had a towel on his face, blood everywhere. And I knew, of course, that Ada and her friend had watched the whole thing. I could hear Ada crying. I held her and watched Lisa, Nick's girlfriend at the time, clean him up. Then I had this thought. This ugliness means something, this pointless ugliness in front of my child. We were shameless, was that it? That must not have been it, because I felt a hot, deep shame. There were tears from shame. It wasn't that we were shameless, it was that we were careless. In that moment, we had closed the distance between carefree and careless. Somehow, as we grew older, we lost our liberated, irresistible claim on being carefree. I felt it then, even if Nick didn't. It had snuck up on us and hardened into something else. Nick signed up for food stamps. Of course, I knew, and Nick knew, that wasn't the whole story. But still, food stamps, don't kid yourself. They help and they don't. When I was pregnant with Ada, they asked me if I wanted WIC coupons. I don't remember what WIC stood for. Women in Calamity, Wombs in Crisis, Whiners in Christ. They told me my income qualified me for WIC pre- and postnatal care and WIC essential food items. I used them for a long time. I got cheese and juice, and later, after she was born, and I discovered my postpartum migraine meds made it a problem to breastfeed, I used WIC for the very expensive formula Ada required. I needed the help. But the coupons were a pain. Each month you had to pick them up in person. You could only go to the supermarkets that accepted them. You could only buy certain things with them, and everyone in line saw you use them. And you knew whatever else you bought, God forbid you bought cigarettes or beer or even a candy bar, even though you paid your own money for it, would be scrutinized by everyone in line. It didn't have to go like that, but it did, and the message was clear to me. I used to drive all the way over to the west side so I could use the Albertsons there. I dreaded running into people I knew. First, I had to get someone to open the locked case where the formula was kept. I never asked why baby formula had to be kept in a locked case. I didn't want to know. Then I felt helpless as I watched the checkout girl sigh when I showed her the coupons. Using them was a complicated transaction involving signatures and product codes and manager approvals. More than once, I would drive out of my way, find the smallest line, go last, and then discreetly hand over the coupon to have the checkout girl call over the intercom loudspeaker for the manager, and then wait, holding up the line as the girl held my coupons aloft. Later, when I got health insurance through another state program, one that issued a regular insurance card that didn't identify how it was funded, I remember how the nurse at my doctor's office asked me, "WIC, right?" And I said no, and I handed her my new insurance card, and she said, "Good for you," with a big smile. I smiled back because what else was I supposed to do? So the food stamps may not have been the whole story, but they certainly made up some significant chunk of the story. Did you find out about getting disability? He shook his head. What? Did you even ask them? It takes ages and ages to get disability. I don't think I qualify anyway. You didn't even ask, did you? I said. Oh yeah, I did. What did they say? ABAWD can GFH. What? able-bodied adult without dependence can go fuck himself. So that's Nick and Denise in their later years. And I'm now going to read from a section that takes place in 1972 when they are young. And I guess you might need to know for the section that Nick is a musician, and he continues to be a musician throughout their lives despite the fact that he doesn't have any external success with it or make money from it. But, and he develops a kind of elaborate, complicated fantasy world to go along with it. So this is the origin of that, and this actually occurs at the end of the book. It's sort of, the book ends with a memory. So this takes place in 1972. And it occurs when Denise has a reverie when she walks into her old house. So it is sort of through the lens of the adult Denise. Lisa and I are doing our makeup in front of the full-length mirrors attached to my sliding closet doors. We are listening to T-Rex and dancing a little as we do ourselves up. We are laughing, but we are also sort of bored. I look up and see that Nick is at the door watching us. He has his new Polaroid SX70. He takes a picture of us in the mirror. I put a hand on my waist and extend the other arm in an exaggerated wave. I wink, I blow a kiss. Lisa puts her arms around my waist and peeks her head through my arm. He takes more pictures. We hear the click and groan as each picture is taken and expelled, and it makes us feel like superstars. He collects each photo as it comes out of the camera and places it on my bed. Nick stops when the film runs out. He pulls out the spent cartridge and chucks it in the wastebasket. He pulls a new pack out of his pocket and clicks it in. He pulls another flash bar and snaps it on top. I have no idea where he gets the money for all the film and flash bars he uses, but he must use tons. A wall of his room is covered from ceiling to floor with Polaroids. At least half are self-portraits. By the time he has switched film, the posing moment is over, and instead of taking more, we all hover over the photos on the bed, watching as they develop. Something about the flash and the Polaroid film makes a made-up face work particularly well. We are eyes and lips and blush-edged cheekbones. We hardly have noses. We look gorgeous. Your album cover, Nick says, pointing to one extra posy shot. We don't have a band, but we nod in agreement. That must be the cover. Now we would have to start a band. As we stare at the pictures, Nick picks up my eyeliner pencil and approaches the mirror. He stares into his eyes' reflection and grips the pencil. Want me to show you, I say? Yeah, but let me do it, he says. I take the pencil and look into the mirror. He watches as I put a finger to my lower lid and pull down. Then I take the hand holding the pencil and apply the tip to the thin strip of skin between eyeball and lash line. I make a dark, smooth line of color. It isn't smudgy at all. It is one of the few things I have mastered in this world. I have the eyeliner business down. Nick watches and then takes the pencil from me and leans close to the mirror. His wide-set eyes are a soft, clear gray, and they look made for augmentation. He shakily applies the liner on one eye and then the other. He blinks at his image. You're a prettier girl than I am, I say, and we all laugh, but it's not really a joke. He is. I don't usually look closely at him, but somehow the eyeliner enables a new appraisal. I also notice Lisa is staring at Nick. He's wearing a t-shirt. He's tall and really skinny. It's a tight t-shirt, baby blue, with a scooped neck. I realize it's actually one of my t-shirts, and I wonder when my brother decided he needed to get his girl on. But he isn't gay, he's just super vain, and he is currently staring at himself in the mirror, his arms folded. Let me take your picture, I say, as if he would ever not let someone take his picture. I pick up his camera and he turns to face me. He starts an apparently well-rehearsed series of poses. He cocks his head, he jets out his jaw slightly and purses his lips. He yawns and looks theatrically bored. He starts to laugh and looks down, hands in pockets. He looks at the camera again, and I notice there is a tiny edge to his expression, an undertone that suggests he's about to do something or is suppressing something. Only you can't quite read it. It might be a smile or a sneer, or he might crack up. And he looks as though he is in on the joke somehow, of the phony poses, of his vanity, of a photograph. I can't quite figure out how this works, but I understand that this is what we mean when we say someone looks cool. My brother looks cool. He is wearing my girly t-shirt and eyeliner, and he pulls it off. He stops abruptly and reaches for his camera. I can't take this music, he says, and leaves the room. Lisa and I examine the photos I just took. They move from gray-brown to big blobs of color and then grow sharper. Nick is a fox, Lisa says. I shrug. He is so familiar, so deeply of my family life that it is nearly impossible for me to believe he is sexually attractive to anyone. I fan out the photos. His looks are an abstract asset to me, something I hope reflects my own attractiveness, which I am also blind to. I hold the little padded border of the photos. He could be in a magazine, sure he could, but so could anyone. Nick and I are both theatrical. We both figured out how far that veneer of theater could take you. I revel in affectation and teach it to Lisa. Even if I weren't already an expert, it wouldn't take a girl long to figure it out. All you have to do is put on your clothes and makeup and go for a walk on Lower Sunset, where all the clubs are, or even just waltz into Hamburger Hamlet. We would get looks, we would get attention. It's fun because we are made up, not just in makeup, but we are made up imaginary people. We are liberated because not only do we know we can pull it off, whatever it is, but we know everyone else is a fake too. Maybe Lisa doesn't yet know this, but I've always known it. We decide to get Nick to drive us over to Sunset. We live not far away, but we don't want to trudge the back blocks in our high heels. Besides, Nick is a good accessory. He always knows what club has good music and is always being invited to parties. If I look iffy and maybe a bit too young, Nick tips the scales in my favor. He ups the charade considerably. You might ask what the goal of all this is, but believe me, it is pretty innocent. We don't have sex, not yet, and we rarely drink much or do any drugs. Nick, alas, is a different story. We just want to be out and around the sex and the drugs, the hip adults. We want to hear good music, and we want, most of all, to be looked at and desired. We want to feel that desire the way you feel the hot sun burning down on your head. We want it to cover us and make us glow. That is enough for me, anyway. I pound on his door. Our walls and doors, his and mine, are covered in posters. The door to his room has a huge poster of Lou Reed's new album, Transformer. Reed has an angular face, prominent ears, and a lot of eye makeup on. He looks like a dainty version of Frankenstein. Now I grasp what Nick is getting at with his ragged drag. He opens the door. He has augmented my t-shirt with an ancient yellow chiffon scarf. He is smoking a joint. He gives us an exaggerated look of fatigue. Lisa giggles with longing as I propose he takes us out. He considers and shrugs. I left a note for Ma, I say. That is all we have to do since she works the night shift. She doesn't usually come back until about 3. But we might want to stay out even later, so we leave a note. She works at a call center, an answering service she has for years. Way back, when our father was still around, Nick would go to his house after school, and I would actually go to work with my mother. They let her bring me, and I would sit under her desk most of the time, eat my sandwich, draw or color, and eventually fall asleep in my sleeping bag. I loved it. I remember looking at my mother's soft legs in nude stockings and low-heeled pumps. She had these chubby legs. She hated them and wore long skirts to hide them, but I loved those legs, loved being near them. She would wake me up at 2, and I would sleepwalk to the car. I'd sleep on the ride home. Usually I wouldn't even remember her finally tucking me into bed. I didn't mind at all. I tried to be as portable as possible. She used to call me her pocket kid. But that didn't last for too long. My father left town again, and Nick and I settled into our routine on our own. In the morning, she sleeps while we get ourselves up for school. I make my own breakfast, blueberry Pop-Tart with vanilla frosting. Nick always just has coffee with tons of sugar. Nick took us out in his purple 1967 Chevy Nova. It was kind of a shit car, but it was a cool shit car. Nick got it cheap. He spent all last summer working as a busboy until he had the money. He quit the job, and now it is a bit of a mystery where he gets his spending money, but I have a few guesses. Like my mom, I pretend not to think about it. We are all really good at pretending we are a normal family, and somehow us pretending all at once is a big part of what makes us feel like a family. It is like a willed self-delusion. Or maybe you can lie to yourself, that's a self-delusion. But if you have a delusion about several people, if you all share in this delusion, that isn't a self-delusion, is it? That is a family. The car is a necessity. We get in, roll down all the windows, and play the radio loud. We all light cigarettes. We drive around. Nothing is really going on. We are bored. We end up at a stupid party for rich high school kids in Westwood. I see no one I want to talk to, and I think it is a horrible scene. But then I notice Nick is making out with a little blonde girl. She's on his lap, and I can tell by the way they are interlacing their fingers and then staring at them that they have taken acid. I sigh. "Call your mom to come pick us up," I say to Lisa. She nods. We leave Nick there. When I open the door, I collapse a little at the thought of the empty house. Without my mother or Nick, I feel more alone than frightened, and I quickly turn on the TV to hear something besides my own breathing. The house is small, low-ceilinged, and contained. I walk through the kitchen to the back door. I walk to the garage, which has become Nick's studio. I use the hidden spare key, open the side door, and snap on the light. Nick has a couch covered by one of our old, thick chenille bedspreads. It is the perfect place to sit and listen to music. He has a pretty good stereo and a set of excellent headphones. He has a makeshift coffee table with a board set on top of it. The board is full of ink marks. Nick likes to sit at the table and draw while he listens to the music. His ink drawings cover the ceiling. Most of them are his album covers. He always draws himself the same as Nick Cat, his alter ego from his zine days, now grown up, a tall, skinny man with a cat head. The style is very comics, but old-timey looking, like World War II propaganda cartoons. Nick Cat's stock pose is bent from the stomach as if he has just been punched. His ever-present cigarette is in mid-air in front of his open mouth. The eyes bug out, the hat flies up. I have no idea why Nick depicts himself that way, but Nick Cat is everywhere, even if he is only a little figure in the corner of a larger work. The walls of the garage are lined in carpet pieces to muffle sound. I sit on the couch. It smells of incense and pot and cigarettes, but the place is actually quite orderly and neat. Nick is not a slob. Every surface is covered, but it looks good. It all works and creates a little world. The part of the garage opposite the couch has the band area, guitars, drum kit, keyboard. There is a microphone and some small amplifiers. The ink drawings on the ceiling, the walls with the carpet pieces, the gear, it all looks great somehow. All the layers and odd juxtapositions, it's as if everything in his head splays out onto the walls. I look for cigarettes in the set of drawers by the couch. He has 3 copies of a Peter Max poster side by side on the back wall. They are mounted on cardboard and tacked into the carpet. They have lots of pink and blue rainbows and stars and a huge Pan Am 747 flying away from an Earth-like head. If Nick likes something, he can't get enough of it. Sometimes he repeats things exactly, sometimes with a slight variation. I think it is like verse, chorus, or how you really love a song after you've heard it over and over, how your body feels almost desperate for the next part. He keeps his records in a row, not in alphabetical order, but in an order based on Nick's very personal and constantly changing categories. He calls the system idiosyncratic. He looked it up in the dictionary, and it comes from the Greek word for private and the Greek word for mixture. So the categories are Nick's private mix of concerns, which means not my concern, I guess, or go ahead and try to figure it out. I turn on the stereo, drop the needle on the record by some band I never heard of. I listen to the chiming acoustic guitar, the gentle boy vocal, the sweet harmonies. The lyrics are childlike and innocent, but there is a little edge of want that feels kind of sexy. It is hard not to wish for a boyfriend who would sing like this. The song ends with a sloppy dribble out and then slips right into a hard electric guitar riff. The next song isn't slow or sweet, but the singer likes to slur the words, mangle them until he sounds almost deranged with want. Like he can't quite get it together because he has it so bad for this girl. Then he's back to singing a slow song and he's hurting, sad, his voice is cracking, and then yikes, there are even some string instruments, a kind of orchestration. He almost loses me, but just at that moment the harmonies overwhelm the strings and the next tough, sweet guitar riff comes in. I am one, all of it, even the dreaded violins. Now I really feel something. Love, sure. Need, sure. Even hurt. Just everything all at once for these guys. I look at the album cover. I lie on the couch. I turn it up. Totally ordinary looking, but I want one for a boyfriend. Just one word-tripping, sloppy boy who I could make stammer and beg, but with harmonies and melodies and all those angelic high notes. I start the slow song again. The voice, I can't explain how much it fits with what I am feeling, what I want and need alone in the garage. I start to sing along and I feel something else. I feel like I am him. This is my little edge of want. So I want to be the voice and I want to be the one the voice wants. All of it at once. I want it so bad. Thank you.
some time for questions if you have them, and I hope you do.
Yes.
How did you get your start as a writer?
I was working for a literary magazine called The Quarterly, which Gordon Lish was the editor of that magazine, and I was secretly working on my novel. And then when I had the novel, I had a number of people that I knew from working at The Quarterly I could send it to and get advice on and get help with. So that was nice, yeah. Working at the literary magazine was helpful, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
How is your career in food, career in fiction?
I hate to break this to you, but I was a waitress until 4 years ago, essentially. It's disappointing to some of the novelists in the audience, probably. No. That's a kind of exaggeration, but I did work in food service the whole time. I was working at the literary magazine. I was also waitressing and then managing restaurants in New York. And then my husband and I moved to upstate New York. We moved to near Cooperstown, and we had our own restaurant. But I was still essentially like the bus girl and the waitress. I was never the chef. I'm not a good cook, but I'm really good at drudgery, like folding napkins and polishing glasses. And you laugh, but it's really, I love it. It's very, I don't know, I loved doing it. I loved being a waitress, and I loved doing the front of the house stuff. The only thing I didn't like was actually talking to people, but everything else was creative. When we were really busy and you just had to be organized and physical, and I loved that. And I write about it a lot. I write about it in, actually all 3 books have elements of food service in it because it was so much of part of my life, you know. And yeah, you do learn a lot about people by being their servant. I think, yeah. There was a question over here. Yeah.
What's it called, Stone Arabia?
Well, there's an important scene that happens in this town called Stone Arabia, which is in Montgomery County, which is just east of here. If you go on 20, keep going east, between here and Albany, Stone Arabia is a little town. And I lived over in that area, and I would drive through this town, and I thought it was so beautiful. And it's much as I describe it in the book. When you come up over the hill, you can see the Mohawk Valley, and you can see the Adirondacks, and it's this magical, beautiful place that seemed so different from Los Angeles, which is where I grew up. So it's stuck in my mind. I like the name. The name is mysterious and sounds beautiful and strange. And so it always stuck in my mind that one day I would write about it. Yes?
Is there any sort of special method you take for crafting scenes where either the narrator or someone close to the narrator is using drugs or alcohol and not, a scene about alcohol?
Right. It's such an interesting question. So he was asking if, when you're writing about drugs and alcohol, how do you make it not about the drugs and alcohol? I mean, well, first of all, I think the one way is that she's not drunk when she's remembering it. So she's reliable in her description of herself as being drunk in the past. If you were narrating it in the present tense while she was drunk, you would have that difficulty, right? Or you could make that work. That would just be another element in it. But I also think it's just I think it's one of the facts, but it's not the full story. And I think one thing to resist is kind of pathologizing your characters by saying, it's another form of cliche or received idea to say that this is all about alcoholism, or this is all about this person has this affliction of some kind, and that's all you need to know about them. I think as fiction writers, we look for complexity, and so yes, they may be an alcoholic, but they also have these other specific things going on, and so your focus is on the adding complexity rather than reducing it to the pathology, I think, is a good, in general, unless that is the subject of your book, alcoholism, or addiction. And then even then, I think you think of a book like Infinite Jest, where addiction is a big part of that book, but it's sort of it really goes to the problem of how do you. There's a lot of cliche around addiction recovery that works. So what does that mean? Sometimes we need these to be reverted to type to fix ourselves, and I think that that was part of the energy of that book, was exploring that language of cliche that's built around that particular pathology. Or in that story, The Depressed Person is a similar, explores sort of those kinds of clinical language that we sometimes apply to human behavior that can feel reductive, but you can explode it if you go right at it. But that's not my intention here, but yeah, so interesting question. Any others? I thought I saw some other hands. Yes, John.
I don't think of the many things we talked about today, we talked too much about the specifics of the form of your novel. They switch person, they will move around in time. I wonder, how do you arrive at their ultimate form? I mean, do you write them in the order, more or less, that they end up being in? Do you rearrange parts?
Yeah, no, I definitely play with it and switch things around until I get it the way it works. In this book, it was really important to me that everything be filtered through Denise's consciousness. There's a document in the middle of the book that's her diary, essentially, her memoir, you could call it. We should call it a counter-chronicle to her brother's own false. Her brother has actually written his own biography because it's not even in the first person. It's not an autobiography, I guess. It's a fake autobiography. Anyway, it sounds very complicated, and it is very complicated, but so I needed to keep everything straight, and I was trying to orient the reader. So there is a third-person narrative that's outside here, and within it there is this big first-person narrative. And however, in the third-person narrative, I found I really wanted to stay very close to her consciousness, and I wanted to go into her mind at various times, which I put in italics, which I think was kind of a cop-out. I should have just left it Roman type and just not even, because you can do whatever you want, and the reader can figure it out. And if you read Ulysses, he just goes into somebody's interior mid-paragraph, doesn't even give you a paragraph break. So, I think sometimes we hem ourselves in with convention and what we think is readable, and I don't think you always have to be so conservative about it. There's so many books that use switch from first and third person. If you have a reason for doing it, you're not arbitrarily, you're not out of control, you have some authority. I think if you have authority and the reader feels that you know what you're doing, then they'll go with you. And I wanted it to be, I didn't want it to be too visible. I wanted you to feel like you were always close to Denise and not be aware of necessarily where the narrative was. But just in terms of the logic of it, it had to be that the memoir was separate from, there was this other reality. So it would interrupt some of her sections with this third person narration to show you she's writing this and now she's not. And I was hoping that would remind the reader that there were two things going on. Because I think you can get lost in her first person narrative and think that that's the novel, when I wanted to keep reminding you that it's actually a story within the novel. It is complicated. I keep saying it's not complicated, but actually it is complicated, yeah. Yes?
How much does having grown up in Los Angeles kind of inform your fiction and inform your life now?
Los Angeles seems really good today. I wish I lived there right now. No. I think for me, geography is really important, as is architecture. I think we talked to some of the students earlier today about just this idea of what shapes human behavior, and so where the story is located is tremendously important. And Los Angeles is such an interesting landscape to me, and I think because I had some formative years there when I was young, I feel it's one of these places that feels both familiar, and I haven't lived there in a long time, so it feels both familiar and strange. So I feel like I know it, but then when I go back and visit, I notice things I would never notice if I lived there. So I think it hits that sweet spot of being a place that, it's like being in exile from a place, so that you're far enough away from it that you can see it, but you're familiar with it, so you know how it works. So I think that for me, that is Los Angeles to a certain extent, and I don't know why it keeps coming up, but it has so many different kinds of, it has so many corners, and it's so fragmented, and it's so strange and spread out, and so beautiful, and it has all this pop culture stuff to it that I really am interested in as well. I write a lot about film, and I write a lot about music, so it seems to hit all those things. So it comes up again and again. I do write about upstate New York a lot, too. I write about it in Eat the Document, and I write about it in Stone Arabia. And I do think the landscape does shape the kind of life that you have. And you'll have a different life if you live in a different place. Just like if you live in a glass house with a lot of horizontal lines, you'll have a different life than if you live in a Greek revival house with little low-ceilinged rooms. So I feel that that's a big part of understanding this cultural moment, and you have to know where the people are and locate them. convincingly in that place and understand how that shapes who they are. I mean, that's just sort of, it's kind of a political point of view, but it's definitely the way I approach fiction. Yeah. Anybody else have it? Okay, guess that's it. Thank you.
Guys, thanks a lot. Remember, there's a reception upstairs in the lounge pretty much now. And if you want to buy a book, you can from John. And we can follow Dana upstairs. She will sign books, I hope. Yes? Sure. And you can talk to her and eat some food. All right. Thanks, guys.